Hello! Our story begins inside of Vader's castle, 3 months following his humiliating defeat to his former master, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Sidious and he had already had their conversations, and Vader would not try to pursue his former master. It was over and done with. Sidious believed, correctly so, that Kenobi would go back into hiding, and it wouldn't be worth their time or effort to drag him out. Not only that, but the fact that Vader would be more unhinged and tap into the darkness more the longer Kenobi was still alive. No need to bring the former Jedi to justice. He would die by old age, or he would make the same mistake by showing himself again. Whichever it was, Palpatine didn't care. His apprentice was still under his control. That much was certain. He turned back, hearing the communication relay buzzing behind him, and it was a message from the Imperial Broadcast Relay, and the sponsor of today's video. For reinforcing your Stormtrooper action figure army or supplying your rebel forces, Raider! We Are Toys has you covered, galaxy-wide. From every era, there's a match for you. If you grew up with the originals, prequels, or sequels, you've got a toy waiting for a new home. We Are Toys delivers with not just new boxes, but repurposed ones instead of bubble wrap, foam, and eco-friendly packing peanuts to make sure no matter how far the destination is, you get your toys in mint condition.
I smell profit!
If you're ordering an item that was previously owned, We Are Toys' quality control team ensures that you know what you're getting your hands on with full transparency. These don't have to just apply to Star Wars, but your favorite franchises out there: Marvel, DC, Barbie, Transformers, and more.
This is where the fun begins.
Additionally, all of their feedback is from authentic buyers, and to place a cherry on top of that, you can join the rewards program to find ways to earn points for discounts that can be added on top of any promotion or sale. They ship every order quickly, ensuring your package finds its way to you with very little delay. So drop in to We Are Toys to get your hands on some of the rarest and greatest finds in the galaxy. Special thanks to We Are Toys for sponsoring today's video. Vader paced around his chambers. His throne sat idly in the middle of the room, looking terrifying as it always did. Behind it, Vader stood, his eyes entrapped behind the glare of his mask. He scanned the lava fields of Mustafar. It really was a decadent place, but it was a healing world. Not like him, though. His wounds, scars, and trauma hadn't ceased, and now there was another plaguing thought. So much of Vader's inner turmoil had ceased in the years after becoming Vader. But there was something new. He had accidentally received a report from a captain of a system fleet in the area around Kessel. Who knows which Moff it was supposed to go to? Who cares? What Vader was upset about was the fact that the Empire had dispatched a Star Destroyer to quell a riot or rebellion on the mining world of Kessel. Vader hadn't ever been a part of the bureaucratic side of the Empire, but nothing ever happened without a reason. Imperial Moffs, senators aligned with Palpatine, and the Emperor himself always had their reasons for doing things. The Empire did things with purpose, and without it, it would never happen. He typically didn't look too deep into these accidental messages, because they did happen in such a large empire, but this was different. A slave uprising that got Imperial attention on a planet not owned by the Empire was not normal. Because he knew his master, the manipulator and the liar, he would go to the Moff himself or herself and speak to them about the deployment of this fleet. He didn't like the idea of sneaking around like this, but they would tell him what it was without hesitation. His shuttle departed from Mustafar and ended up at the Moff's palace on the capital world of the territory that existed outside of Kessel. When he met with the Moff, the man told him that the purpose of this exercise was to protect Imperial interests. The Moff was truly confused on why Vader didn't know, but he walked him through the entire process. The Empire didn't own Kessel, but they made a small profit off the criminal syndicates. This perturbed Vader a lot, and the Moff would go into great detail about their operations out here on the frontier. Typically, the Moffs profited off of it, but it was a good way for the Empire itself to avoid actually getting involved in the slave trade. Vader accepted this and vanished from the Moff's palace. He wanted to kill the man, but it wasn't worth his time. His death wouldn't stop the Empire from enslaving people, or at the very least, supporting it. Vader thought to himself and considered what else could be done about it. As an Imperial, he technically couldn't do much. Maybe suggest a movement in the Senate that had no power? There really actually wasn't much he could do, and that was a sickening realization. He had known, but only subconsciously. His eyes sat idle on the land where he lost his first duel to Obi-Wan. The raging lava rivers had subsided, and they were shrinking down. The planet was healing, and yet here he was, with no sign of growth. His heart hurt, and his mind was nothing but a chasm. He longed for something more. A chance to undo the slavery in the Empire was a satisfying way to do it. He really had a superficial grip on power within his own establishment, and that needed to change. Vader moved from his throne room to his ship and departed Mustafar once more. Instead of trying to hash things out with his Emperor, he would speak to senators to try and get a more whole picture of the scenario. It was troubling because Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, and Tyne Rapalmo were all friends of Padme, but they would have the most opposing view of the Empire, and he wanted to at the very least hear these things through. He met quietly with them because he could afford to. They weren't being watched at the moment as far as he knew. He learned that they had no clue there was a slave ring supported by the Empire. Obviously for his own sanity, he didn't say anything about it, just simply moved on and questioned individuals that supported Palpatine but weren't close to him. They spoke about how they'd been exploiting their citizens for their own economic growth, and Vader again moved on. Now to clarify, Vader did not grow some immaculate moral compass in the span of a few days. He was still the Dark Lord of the Sith, apprenticed to the most powerful Sith the galaxy had ever seen. But he did not like that the Empire was contributing to slavery. Vader was not above murdering. He killed an entire family, minus the mother or wife when he was on Mapuzo hunting Obi-Wan. He had no issue doing that, and he wouldn't have a problem doing it again. But it seemed like no matter how hard he tried to get rid of Anakin Skywalker, he always existed. Somewhere deep in his chest, hidden behind a wall in his black heart, there was a shred of little Annie left inside. The boy who wanted to be a Jedi, the boy who wanted to see every star in the galaxy, and the boy who wanted to come home and free the slaves. After leaving the second senator meeting, that's what hit him. He walked to the edge of the landing docks at the executive building. The sun was setting on Coruscant. He spent 10 years as a Sith and 13 years as a Jedi. If he really wanted to compare the two, he could even say 10 years as a Jedi before he ever returned to Tatooine. Vader considered what he accomplished. His cape buckled in a jolt of breeze from the tunnels and the skyscrapers miles away. He thought about how little he had actually done with his life. His inner child was dying. Anakin Skywalker, the boy who wanted to save people, was dying. But he wasn't dead, and perhaps that was his greatest crime as a Sith. His own slavery to the Emperor forced him to lose sight of everything that he was, and yet here he was, nothing. Despite him trying to be cold and brooding, the wind crept through his armor and he felt a tingle sensation, a feeling reminding him that this was real life. He was alive, maybe inside of the suit, but he wasn't just a monster. Maybe he could remain Darth Vader and still remain a part of the Empire, but it didn't have to promote slavery. Their empire spanned from the core to the outer rim, and yet despite all their conquering, they couldn't stop a single slave ring. As he was standing there, feeling the wind against his skin under his armor, he felt a chill, a presence. His eyes turned back and looked at his emperor. Sidious asked him why he was probing around senators of the support caucus. Vader wanted to ask how, but Palpatine knew everything, and he was unwise to believe that his master wouldn't have found out. But he found out sooner than he ever thought he would. Palpatine must have been watching Organa, Palmo, and Mothma already. Vader asked his master why they were allowing slavery to continue, and his master smiled under his hood, apologizing, having forgotten that Anakin Skywalker and his mother were once slaves. The slavery that exists in the lawless reaches of the Outer Rim is wrong, Palpatine said. He continued expressing what the Empire was doing was different. He explained that any slave of the Empire was a separatist or rebel, individuals who had done wrong to the Empire, and were turning it around and doing something better for the people. They were not to be hurt or executed. Their lives would be spared. But first, there was punishment. Palpatine turned on his heel, speaking under his breath, with his head turning, telling his people that he hoped he would understand. Silence washed over his body, and he turned back and saw his master vanish into the shadows of the pillared walk of the executive building. He started over towards his shuttle and entered, preparing to depart back to his home world. As he was doing that, a trooper stationed inside came up to him with a data pad and gave it to him, telling him that his list was complete. Vader thanked him and scanned over it. As he did, he saw a name that caught his attention, Admiral Thrawn. The Chiss admiral had been recently dispatched to Buttigieg to assist Fleet Admiral Donasius with a rise in some sort of rebel activity. It was completed and Thrawn's report was sent into Imperial High Command. Vader instructed the pilot to get into contact with the admiral and sent him to Mustafar. When Vader arrived at his home, he could see the individual's flagship, called the Chimera, sitting idly over the planet. Inside the hangars, Thrawn awaited Vader's arrival so that he could go down and understand what it was that Vader wanted to tell him. When they both landed, Vader walked with Thrawn into the castle together, asking him about Buttigieg, as it was all explained. The Admiral was very successful, and his position in the Empire was for a reason: his belief in a strong, united Imperial power. Vader knew this before ever reaching out to Thrawn. Because the Dark Lord was still trying to bury Anakin Skywalker, he thought he should speak to someone neutral in everything, well, technically neutral. Thrawn and Anakin had their interaction during the Clone Wars, and it was here, in the present, that Vader and Thrawn could solidify their relationship. Once the Admiral finished his talk about Buttigieg, they sat down in a communication room. There were droids controlling the shields in the castle and maintaining the structure in the harshness of Mustafar. Thrawn expressed that he knew that Vader didn't bring him here to learn about Buttigieg, and asked what it was that the Dark Lord would like to speak to him about. Vader asked Thrawn if he was at all aware of the slave rings that the Empire was supporting. Admiral Thrawn leaned back, crossing his leg over the one still planted on the floor. He rubbed his chin and then shook his head. He was not aware of any slavery. They had stopped insurrections of slaves in Moff territory, but that was different, no? Vader understood that Thrawn wasn't aware, and so he informed him of the castle incident with some smuggler inside of a Corellian YT model freighter. He asked Thrawn if this was satisfactory work in the Empire. He addressed the question with another one, pondering if this was a trick. Vader shook his head. Simply a matter of opinion. Thrawn admitted that while the Empire was ever expansive, there were those that simply partook in its vast power for one thing, and that was money. Moffs and many other Imperial officers only cared about the credits they could earn, which was fine, but there was something off about that in his own mind. Vader continued, suggesting that if the Empire was supporting slavery and even piracy in the Outer Rim, would that not bear bad tidings for such a system? Thrawn pointed to the incident he had just returned from at Buttigieg. It was clear people wanted to rise up. They were not unified, though Thrawn had a warning, telling Vader that no other Imperial officer would take this legitimately, which was the problem. But these unaligned rebellions were trouble. There would be a day when all those power and money-obsessed Moffs and admirals met their end at the hands of a united force. As an empire, Thrawn believed it was their place to sow unity and strength throughout the galaxy. But with so many lost on their lack of ethical purpose as leaders of the Empire, then it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when these rebellions would form an alliance under their noses, and when that day came, they might not be able to stop it. An expansive military doctrine may be powerful, and a Senate with no power may be good for credits, but it was not feasible in the long run. Thrawn then asked Vader a question. Was he uncomfortable with this rise in complacency? Thrawn knew Vader had powers and connections to the Force, so the question dragged on, being that someone with such powers could relate to the Jedi. Their complacency ended their order. Wouldn't that mean the same for him and his ancient religion? Vader nodded his head. Thrawn had assumed that Vader was Anakin, but never made a mention of it. This left the two individuals sitting silently. Vader knew where he was going to go with this, but how? This wasn't some return to the light. This was a manifestation of defining the Empire for long-term success. Thrawn didn't want to admit it, but if Vader was going to be in his corner, then maybe it was worthwhile. Challenging the entire might of the Empire wasn't feasible, but there were those that would try to excel their careers in the chaos. Individuals that would take a chance just because they could have success on the other side. Thrawn proposed that they start small and work their way up, if they were going to do this. Vader could sense the unease, and he told Thrawn that if they were in this together, then they needed to trust each other. Thrawn agreed, giving Vader a communication device, telling him that it would and could tap into any communication he sent from the Chimera or his personal devices. It was agreed upon, and the stage was set. The beginning of this would be nothing but compiling reinforcements. Longtime Palpatine loyalists were out of the question. People on the fence could be bargained with, but everything had to remain silent. While so much of this did seem to rally around the Empire's protection of slavery, that really was the truth. Thrawn was only in this because he understood that stability would come from Imperial growth. These were simply writings in his own journals and notebooks, never thoughts or ideas he would spit out to people around him until Vader brought him to Mustafar. Thrawn understood Imperial officers. They were easy to decipher, so he didn't try to play this game with people that weren't worth his time. Captain Pellaeon was all on board with this, and using his alliances from his longtime position within the military, he'd be able to gather allies for their cause. Much of this work went unnoticed for months, rolling around to 8 BBY. The Empire started to feel tense. For common citizens, it didn't feel like it, but inside the military, Senate, and inner circles, the tension was becoming identifiable. Palpatine was able to slow it down, as he had in the past, especially after the initial rise of the Empire, but this was different. There was only so much he could do, and he could sense the tension between him and his apprentice. As a means to certify Vader's allegiance, he sent inquisitors from Nur to Mustafar. Their job was simply to figure out where his loyalties lay. In the meantime, he was sending Tarkin, Yularen, and a couple other allies to Kuat to defend their shipyards there. The Coruscant defense fleet was fine, and despite everything looking cheery for the people of the galaxy, the Imperial military was preparing for war. Ironically, the first hit to signify the beginning of the end of the peace times was a skirmish between two Star Destroyers. There were some fighters in the battle, but nothing came out of it, aside from a destroyed ship and Outer Rim territory. Inside Vader's castle, he left his bacta tank and suited up, due to a proximity alert, showing that there were Inquisitors coming to visit him. As he finally exited, he walked out into the main chamber, into a large chasm, where a catwalk sat in the middle. On the catwalk were the Grand Inquisitor and a number of his remaining members. They were fresh after losing the fourth sister to some mutiny of some kind, and now they were here, questioning Vader's loyalty. Grand Inquisitor didn't want to do this, and Vader could see that. His hands were raised to his hips, and he told them that they did not have to die. The era of Palpatine was at an end, and they didn't need to be a part of his collapse. But he warned them they would not leave his castle if they sided with the Emperor. Grand Inquisitor liked the prospect of this, and asked Vader if he was taking students in the dark arts. Vader didn't audibly say a word, but he nodded his head. Grand Inquisitor ignited his lightsaber, which the others followed by doing with their own. Seventh Sister told Vader that she would take his side. As she turned back and looked at the others, part of this decision-making for these Inquisitors was because they had sparred with Vader before. He in their minds was more terrifying than Palpatine, because Vader had shown them his brute strength. None of these Inquisitors had seen what Palpatine was capable of, and therefore, Grand Inquisitor rallied with Vader, followed by Marek. The other remaining individuals were to be killed. A battle began and Grand Inquisitor along with his steadfast allies got to work, killing the traitors that sided with the false Empire. By the time they were finished, Vader was gone. He took a communication inside of his throne room, one where Thrawn informed him of the combat that had taken place. He was pleased, thanking the good Admiral. When he finished, he turned to the three remaining Inquisitors and told them to go far and wide, hunt down Palpatine loyalists, and execute them. Though he warned them of going too far into the core. The Imperial Civil War was about to commence. The first true battle of the war was a siege at Fort Vakar in the Vakar system. It didn't involve Thrawn or Vader, actually. It involved a general from a random regiment from Megiddo, but it signaled to the galaxy that the Empire wasn't as strong as it claimed to be. Palpatine attempted to communicate with his student, but Vader cut contact, knowing that his master could kill him from a galaxy away. He did not want that to happen, so he forced his hand and made sure that he couldn't be killed by his master. This worked in his favor, but as the war kicked off into overdrive after the siege at Fort Vakar, the war did not go in favor of the insurgent Imperial movement that was referring to itself as the Imperial Rebirth. For 2 years, the Empire would split itself up into multiple battle lines. Thrawn and Vader were heading their respective sides of combat, while on the flip side of their war effort, the Imperial Rebirth was stripping pirates, slavers, and criminal syndicates of their power in the Outer Rim. A defining characteristic of this new movement was it rallied people to its cause. The Empire itself, or the Imperial Authority in faction name, didn't rally people. Many of those under the protection of the Authority didn't enlist to fight their brothers or sisters, because the promise from Palpatine's regime is that they had already won a civil war before, and this would be no different. Palpatine put down the Confederacy, and he would do the same to the Rebirth. He didn't lie either. The war had gone terribly for the Rebirth. They attempted to get into Authority territory, but they really couldn't. They cracked some frontier planets in the eastern quadrant of the flank, but it didn't get them too far. As they were closing in on losing the war, the Authority made a move into Rebirth territory. The tragedy is, Thrawn had been winning battles due to superior tactics, The issue is, the Authority simply could continue throwing ships, troopers, and credits at the burning fires, whereas the Rebirth had very little to work with. Most of the operations for the Rebirth were going out of Sullust, and the Authority made a beeline for the star system midway through the second year of combat. With Thrawn currently besieging an important Imperial shipyard at Raxus Prime, Sullust was left to throw defenses into a field over at Vondark on the Rima trade route hyperspace lane outside of Sullust. It was their first line of defense from a crippling blow to their capital. Palpatine dispatched the main fleet to the system to destroy the last remnant of Vader's military. When they arrived, Vader prepared his own defenses. They had set up 2 Golan platforms right outside of the space station over Vondark. Outside of those was the gravity well generator that quickly gripped the Imperial Authority fleet out of hyperspace. Former Admiral Yularen was tasked with defeating Vader. He by this point was aware that Anakin was Vader, so he was meant to know every single counter or move that Vader could make. With reinforcements coming from around the mid and outer rim to reinforce both the Rebirth and Authority, this battle set the stage to be the largest conflict of the entire war. Vader's fleet moved in position. They opened fire on the Authority vessels. His Star Destroyers did not move past the Golans. Instead, they used their long-range cannons to deliver heavy strikes on the Imperial fleet. The Authority moved in from out of range and began using their heavy cannons too. At this distance, Yularen knew that Skywalker would get impatient, and so he hoped for a counter, but it never came. Vader was far too patient for that by this point, and he wouldn't make such an irresponsible mistake, especially not after losing the Kenobi twice. He strategically layered his destroyers around the Golans, so that they could manufacture a strong defense. They could not risk their Star Destroyers. For the first few hours, the heavy artillery didn't breach the shields, but it was a grueling conflict until Vader had to pull his destroyers back. They couldn't afford to keep up combat with the long-range artillery from the Authority fleet. With the retreat of Vader's fleet back to the space station, it gave time for both Yularen and Vader to recuperate and prepare for the next leg of combat. The first day of Vondark was a reflection of the war for the most part. The Rebirth had sound strategies, but both sides were using the same weapons, not to mention the fact that the Authority just had more vessels. Vader was now without his Golan platforms, and while Yularen did lose a couple destroyers in the fight, it wasn't something he was completely or overly concerned with. In the period between the first day and second day of combat, reinforcements littered both flanks. On the far east side of the battle map, a wing of corvettes engaged with some TIE fighters. Imperial Tartan II class patrol cruisers on behalf of the Rebirth countered some TIE interceptors trying to find an advantage point for the Authority. This accidental run-in would save the back half of the Authority line from crumbling. This also would kick off another push from the Authority forces. Vader and his defense fleet would again hold the line. But it wouldn't be enough as the Authority crushed their defenses and forced them into another retreat, pushing Rebirth vessels to protect the planet of Vondark itself, this time without the defenses of the Golans or the space station, which was now lost. There was another bloody conflict as well, but this was a fighter fight. The Tartan IIs met up with the rest of the fleet before the space station fell. Inside of an asteroid belt that covered the eastern flank, a little closer to Authority lines than the previous skirmish. This was TIE interceptors and fighters engaging in a bloody free-for-all inside of the asteroid field. On the far left flank of the Empire, shortly before the day came to an end, Authority reinforcements from the west, from outside of Tibrin, popped into Vondark space, and led to this conflict. Colonel Veers, who had experience inside of a spacecraft before transferring to ground work, had to fill in for the lack of leadership. He was at the helm of a Star Destroyer that was not his, but the colonel had to do his duty. When he was a cadet long ago, before the blockade of Naboo, Veers had served on a Republic vessel called the Assurance, even having run into Mace Windu aboard that ship. He was certainly experienced enough to hold a line here. From Tibrin came a force of light cruisers headed by a Victory-class Star Destroyer. With long-range cannons on the Victory, Veers had to sacrifice some of his bombers, but he refused to move out of position. If he did, it could disrupt the entire Rebirth line, and so he held his line for 3 waves of Authority attacks, until he caved and pushed back. He moved out of position, but it resulted in the complete destruction of the Tibrin support fleet. By the time the third day came around, the Authority was getting impatient. Vader's fleet had lined up its heavy artillery, and they were waiting for an Authority attack, and Yularen bit the bait. With superior forces, how could he not win? His troops moved in and Vader waited patiently. At first, it was nothing but long-range cannons. So many that people on the surface of Vondark could apparently even hear it. The Authority rolled in. Its destroyers went in first, with support ships moving between the crevices of the fleet. Vader made a gutsy call, telling his destroyers to target their support ships, and so they did. The weaker corvettes, cruisers, and light frigates could not handle the attacks, and so in their match on Vader's position, Yularen's fleet started to crack open. The Dark Lord watched pridefully as the Authority started to buckle. Yularen kept up his assault. Their morale was high, why wouldn't he? He pressed with everything he had, and the Sith Lord watched with anticipation. Yularen's destroyers started receiving double the attacks because once they got into full range, not only could every weapon on every Star Destroyer open fire, but all the surviving support ships that Yularen never targeted were able to suppress fire as well. Shields on the Authority destroyers started to buckle, and Yularen decided to press for the middle, sending one of his vessels in, hoping to create a wavering of Rebirth forces because they had retreated 2 days in a row. The destroyer cruised in and collided with one of Vader's support destroyers, but it didn't work in favor of the Authority. Sacrificing that position allowed the Vader-aligned vessel to get rid of all of its crew and set the engines forward, allowing it to collide with another vessel, giving Vader's fleet time to pick apart the massive hull left in Yularen's lines. They tried to make it right, but it was too late. They had lost. Yularen tried to turn Authority forces around and return to the core, but upon their retreat, there was only one other Star Destroyer to survive. Yularen would be left to apologize to the survivors, for he had failed them. The victory over Vondark, which took 3 days of the most intensive combat during the war, was backed up by the remarkable victory over Raxus Prime and her shipyards a day later. It was a careful siege. Raxus would be the perfect location to start producing new Star Destroyers, and so for the past 2 months, Thrawn had been out of combat because he was starving the system into rebellion. Finally, it came. In 4 days, the Rebirth movement saw its shining light. After being in darkness for so long, they now had a rallying cry, one that would support them. So many heroic stories came out of just 2 battles alone, and they pressed in. Politically, the Empire was a mess. Those who agreed with Vader and Thrawn left the capital of the Imperial Authority and relocated to Sullust. Among them were Organa, Mothma, and Palmo. These senators and leaders started dedicatedly crafting up a means to reform their government. Something else that went a long way for building support for the Rebirth movement was what they did outside of their war with the Empire. While yes, they were losing, especially naval battles due to overwhelming numbers from the Authority, they were collecting alliances with their citizens. So as they held their lines, they built a repertoire with the people they were fighting for. Vader didn't really have a part in this. He understood the rationale for it, but he wasn't exactly the best person to be parading around for that. However, he did make some changes to his armor. It was slimmer, it wasn't as scary, and he tried to make amends with those he had hurt, for political purposes. Despite him remaining a Sith in theory, serving with 3 Inquisitors, he was starting to have a bit of his return to Anakin Skywalker. The Rebirth movement also went out of its way to take down criminal organizations with spare resources, many of which they didn't really have, but it was worthwhile in their minds. It cultivated their movement to resonate with people, which was everything they needed. With Raxus Prime and Vondark out of the way, it was time for them to shift into an offensive. The war would heat up overwhelmingly in the following year, and the Rebirth movement would catch stride following their victories in Authority territory. The real kicker for the Authority was the use of an Imperial plan formed by the late war switcher Director Krennic. As a military director, he found that serving with Tarkin was a pain, being that he was never able to get his hands super dirty. The war was going poorly for the Authority, and he decided that he would cement himself in the new Empire, so he left. Krennic's first interaction would be with Vader, one that he barely survived, but he proposed a plan. He called it the Anakinskywalker plan. Initially, he wanted to use it against the Rebirth, and he did tell Vader that, saying that almost got him killed, but he was at the very least being a bit honest. Though what Krennic suggested was brilliant. These weren't concrete attacks, and they wouldn't disrupt civilian life in the slightest. The Anakinskywalker plan focused on targeting military targets within Authority territory, so essentially, raiding parties for the Rebirth would torch everything in sight. Refineries that didn't impact civilian life, bases, factories, shipyards, whatever they could get their hands on that had to do with the military movement. Krennic also suggested immediate implementation of this, because the Empire was preparing to produce and release new starships. The reason Vader, and later on Thrawn, really liked this plan was because it was the perfect route to victory. Their ground forces barely saw any action, so this was the best way to get them into battle. Most of this war had been space battles, and the Rebirth had millions of troopers, rebels, and citizen fighters that wanted to help. This movement wasn't a true rebellion, but a call for a new empire. Rebirth spies informed Vader and Thrawn that Krennic was a traitor to the Authority and that his actions were legitimate, and so the Anakindan plan was set forward. It started with now General Veers leading Death Troopers to Authority planets. Following the first assault, the Inquisitors led by Mr. Hello himself went into action. Vader and Thrawn knew this was a winning strategy. Following the beginning of the Anakindan plan was the collapse of the Hutt Syndicate. Imperial forces entrenched in the Outer Rim won. It was both a combination of a slave rebellion and Imperial troopers. The Rebirth established themselves in the Outer Rim early into the war, because things were off to a shaky start. Due to them already being in there was no reason for them to pull out. Sometime between then and now, Vader killed Darth Maul in combat. It wasn't very exciting for Vader, but he did what needed to be done. The collapse of Crimson Dawn forced the criminal empires into weak positions, and with Imperial Star Destroyers bearing down on them, it was only a matter of time until the pressure broke open the dam. Vader and Thrawn's respective fleets saw a path being carved into the core. It went straight to Coruscant and they took it. Instead of using both of their respective fleets sparsely, Thrawn implemented a new strategy during the battle. He knew that the Authority would attempt to defend their space stations, which was all fine and dandy, but he would use all their forward fleets to drop gravity wells, which would and could be remotely activated. Upon their activation, they would deploy Star Destroyers wherever they wanted on the battlefield. Due to how inconsistent hyperspace travel was, they could be able to drop everything wherever they wanted. Due to the nature of their fight, the Rebirth was using more support ships, throwing in a couple acclimators just because they could carry LA-ATs and TIE fighters. Literally anything to win this war. So with the stage set over Coruscant, the Rebirth and Authority interlocked after months of the Anakindan plan ravaging through Imperial facilities. As this battle was taking place, a commando team led by Grand Inquisitor and Saw Gerrera were going into the capital itself to usurp the power structure. This was not Palpatine. No one knew where he was, but they did know that Tarkin was present over Coruscant. The Grand Moff was completely unprepared for Thrawn's strategy, but at his helm were two new battle cruisers. The first one was a Titan-class battlecruiser, and the second was the Allegiance-class Heavy Star Destroyer. As Thrawn correctly predicted, Tarkin would defend his space stations. They were powerful and defensible, similar to Vader's victory over Vondark. Thrawn understood Imperial officers like Tarkin. They would take without ever saying thanks, and so Tarkin thought he could rip off Vader's brilliant defense of Vondark, which is exactly why this didn't work. When he wasn't campaigning, Thrawn ran simulations of former battles, searching for ways to achieve victory. He always went up against the winner, and the strategy he was about to use here was exactly why he believed it would win at Coruscant. With smaller units entering the fray, Tarkin continued to supply his lines with Imperial destroyers. Upon Thrawn's request, Vader's destroyer remained out of the battle line, so that the strategy could be implemented. Thrawn knew that Tarkin knew which destroyer belonged to Vader, and would cause him reason to panic or reason to target. With Coruscant in space in immediate danger, the ground erupted into chaos. The commandos were able to rally together believers, as they called themselves, in a fight against Imperial forces defending the Senate Executive Building and Imperial Palace. Despite Palpatine not being home, holding these landmarks would show the effectiveness of the Imperial Rebirth, and all three fell before the battle in space was finished. It was a horn sounding to the galaxy that Palpatine had run from battle, and the regime of his order was at an end. The Authority line in space started to buckle, even with the presence of the Titan-class battlecruiser and the Allegiance-class Star Destroyer. Rebirth fighters were doing too much. Thanks in part to the usage of acclimators and carriers, the Rebirth fleet, aided by some other freedom fighters, were able to completely overwhelm the Authority fleet. It was a continuous back and forth. Vader's flagship crept up to the fleet combat and started laying down heavy ordnance on any support ships willing to confront it. Thrawn, on the other hand, stood on his bridge, his arms tied behind his back, and he watched everything play out perfectly. He picked the vessel that Tarkin was on board of. When the battle started, Tarkin inhabited the space station, but even the icy cold Imperial Grand Moff got cold feet, which was so very rewarding for Thrawn. He picked apart the defenses of the Titan, which is where he predicted Tarkin went to. While the Titan battlecruiser was no joke, and it forced the Rebirth to eat some heavy casualties. This battle was necessary. Midway through the combat, Thrawn was informed of the surface-level combat. Captain Pellaeon called out with jubilee, telling the Grand Admiral that they had won over the Senate District on Coruscant. The palace had also fallen. Thrawn scouts on the far side of the planet detected movement. A mass exodus of the Authority upper class were escaping. He sent the destroyer to cut them off. Most of them would escape by the time it arrived. In the middle of the battle line, Thrawn's forces crushed through Authority defenses. Despite victory on the surface being mostly confirmed, the Rebirth needed to tighten up their victory here. As he was pondering Krennic's next move in the Anakindan plan, his mind snapped back to the lighting up of the Titan. Next to it, the Allegiance was struggling to keep up. The battle was ripping through the defenses. Thrawn knew Tarkin was a fool, but he just moved himself into the worst position possible. The Titan got itself caught in the middle of the Rebirth fleet by moving forward, presumably to counter or to try and retreat. But with Thrawn's interdictors, that was impossible. Vader's flagship would just get a little bit closer, and the battle would finish up, seeing the end of the Authority's naval presence on Coruscant. There would be some pleasantries to attend to, displaying their power over the city world and uplifting the believers for their valiant effort. With the core of the galaxy secured, the Rebirth movement started getting a little comfortable, but not too much. Vader and Thrawn wouldn't allow that to happen. With the main Rebirth leaders gathering up, they decided on their final battle plans. Krennic, Grand Inquisitor Gerrera, Vader, Veers, Pellaeon, and Thrawn were among these leaders. It was obvious, thanks to Krennic's Anakindan plan, that the Emperor was hiding with Grand Admiral Gallius Rax on the planet Chandrilia. It was a safe haven for those that fled from Coruscant during their battle. Krennic informed them that they didn't have the resources to push for that planet. Even with everything they stole, they would need a direct head-on engagement with that fleet to win, and that would only be feasible with a Thrawn strategy. Gerrera spoke up, asking what they needed to do before getting there. Pellaeon pointed to the map and explained that while their main fleet was present at Chandrilia, safe from Rebirth attacks, it seems they hid themselves there, forcing the Rebirth movement to dive in after them. Chandrilia was mounting up more Allegiance battleships from Kuat, not to mention every system between Coruscant and Chandrila had a number of Golan platforms, as well as fleets present. Obviously, they couldn't go straight through that. It would be impossible. They would need to come out unscathed and hope that they didn't get countered midway through those attacks. Grand Inquisitor proposed an extension to the Anakindan plan, and Krennic mapped it out silently. As he was doing that, the others continued talking. When he finished after 10 or so minutes, he reached up, pointing at the map and telling them that it could work. There was a hidden space route used by the Separatists during the Clone Wars. It would pop them out at Keda Nemodia. Gerrera got a little giddy. There had been reports of a massive uprising on that system, so if they showed up, they could potentially steamroll anyone that was present and jump straight to their target from there, and so it was agreed upon. Gerrera, who had gained allies in his attack on Coruscant, gathered his forces up and joined Grand Inquisitor on their next commando mission. Gerrera sided with this movement because it was his only one chance to take down the evil extension of the Empire. He did hope that there would be substantial change in the new era, but if there wasn't, then he had a coalition of loyalists built up over the span of the Civil War that would be ready to fight with him. After about a week, Keda Nemodia would fall under the pressure of a commando attack and total uprising from rebel forces. This left the fleet undefended, especially without control over their hypervelocity cannon, and so they left. The Rebirth moved in, established themselves, gathering any freedom fighters that wanted to join them, which actually included one lonely Venator, apparently the last one that was operable. The Venator joined their fleet and they left for Chandrila. When they arrived, it was a couple sparse engagements. The two Imperial fleets converged on one another, and before a true battle could begin, an entire space station turned on its Emperor. There were a collection of 3 space stations that lined up the northern quadrant of the battle map. They had been waiting, and without a commander raid, they changed sides, giving Thrawn the chance to repeat his strategy from Coruscant. But this one would be a little bit more advanced, tightening up some loose ends in his attack pattern. The Emperor, according to these troops inside the space stations, expressed that the Emperor was inside of one of the 2 allegiances roaming around the system. If they could destroy it, they could kill him. The Imperial Rebirth moved in. As the skirmish between the Venator and an Acclamator took place, Thrawn dropped 3 destroyers in the combat. This was only the beginning. Also, it seemed kind of ironic, but the Authority was losing support after their devastating loss at Coruscant. Not only that, but the fact that Palpatine wasn't there only shredded what little support he had left. His image had been reduced from wartime hero to coward, and now he was going to pay for his decisions. Palpatine's allegiances moved into combat. With two of them on the battle map, the Rebirth had to divide their forces. Vader wanted so badly to kill his master from the bridge of his Star Destroyer, but it seemed impossible. Palpatine was elusive. The fight began to broaden very quickly. Once Thrawn showed his 3 destroyers, the Authority moved in. Thrawn had studied Gallius Rax, and he knew that the good Admiral's greatest strength was his ability to bluff. Thrawn knew to withhold his forces until they crushed through most of the fleet. The first allegiance was misplaced badly, and that told Thrawn that the Emperor was not in that one. The allegiance was surrounded by 4 Imperial 2s, with the Victory and Venator popping the sides of it for fun. What was surprising was how strong their hulls were. Despite having no shields, the massive destroyer refused to get destroyed, just another project in the overinflated Tarkin doctrine. With the allegiance crumbling, the Authority made a move against the space stations at the top of the battlefield. It was an odd choice, but Thrawn communicated to his allies and they deployed. General Veers, who had been moved back into space combat, and Captain Paleon each batted back the Authority counter. Gallius Rax was likely commandeering Palpatine's flagship for personal use, and then it showed up. Thrawn moved every single force he could. It wasn't dumb because Gallius was vastly unprepared, mentally, for this battle. Thrawn preyed off of those weaknesses as the fleet rounded a small asteroid belt in the middle of the battlefield. The heavy cannons on the destroyers opened fire, and Lord Vader was hailed by the Grand Admiral of the Rebirth fleet. With TIE bombers running down the side of the hull, the Allegiance buckled. Its shields were smacked with torpedoes and the interior of the ship rocked back and forth. Gallius panicked, calling out for reinforcements but struggling. He had tried to counter Thrawn. His strategy was to distract the Grand Admiral, pick off his support craft, and then bring everything to encircle Thrawn. But unlike Coruscant, Thrawn did not deploy his fleet so recklessly. He was lucky that Tarkin was himself, because in his own mind, he should have lost at Coruscant. But here, Gallius tried to pick off weak targets, and now he paid the price. With every ship in their fleet targeting his allegiance, Emperor Palpatine demanded answers. As he got to the bridge, he felt the presence of his apprentice, and not more than a couple seconds later, a Star Destroyer dropped out of hyperspace, Vader's Devastator. He told the commander on deck to open fire, and the backside of the Allegiance was shredded by the heavy cannons on the flagship. Vader looked down. He felt powerful. He felt like Anakin Skywalker. No longer was he subservient. He hadn't been for the past 3.5 years. But now, he was fully embracing his power. He was fully embracing himself. The Sith Lord's flagship bear down on Sidious's vessel. It rocked back and forth under the pressure as Gallius told his Emperor to get to the hangar bay. They would get him out of here and continue this fight. Authority reinforcements were coming, but not fast enough. They kept getting clipped or cut off. Every time another Star Destroyer got closer, they were deterred by Thrawn's use of the interdictor fields he deployed. The battle started to intensify as Gallius tried to push past the Imperial fleet. He couldn't though. The engines on the flagship were disabled, and he watched fire rain down on him from above. This is what the end felt like. He told the officers in the hangar to get the Emperor out of here, but there was no communication. A wing of TIE bombers under Vader's instructions ran a bombing run on the hangar bay. Sidious was running through the ship, looking for the escape pods. As he found the chambers, Vader's ship unloaded another heavy volley of firepower, and it was a nail in the coffin. Sidious was destroyed. An attempt at essence transfer to Exegol would send an explosion through the Force, cratering the hidden Sith world, not just killing the Emperor indefinitely, but destroying his cultists and their fleet. Back over Chandrila, the forces of good were pushing back. Their fleets continued growing, and the Imperial Loyalists, now under the leadership of Grand Admiral Rey Salone, tried to rally. But there was hardly anything she could do. Gallius had left her in a terrible position. She couldn't get her forces to fight back hard enough. She was hoping that a shot at the Imperial Rebirth inside the space stations would loosen up the fight, and while her push did, the Rebirth deployed 2 brand new Imperial destroyers, ones that would shred the one vessel she had sent in as a sacrificial lamb. While that ship sacrifice was one of greatness, it would be the final strike to cripple the Imperial attack here at Chandrila. The Authority couldn't do anything more about what had already begun. On the flip side, Director Krennic got his day in the sun, with the rest of the Rebirth. He was able to take over Destroyer at Coruscant after a long internal battle. but thanks to the aid of the Seventh Sister, it resulted in him and her being able to join the fight. It was pretty much over by the time they got to the planet, but they were a part of the small task force that destroyed the final Authority Loyalist station in the system. It was a triumph, and while the Empire of Old wasn't gone, it was mostly destroyed. Its morale was crippled. V-Day for the Rebirth did come at Chandrilla, but there would be more skirmishes to be had. The rebel movement started from within the Empire itself was overbearing, an already dead movement. With another criminal organization crumbling, the last resistance in the Outer Rim, a week after Chandrilla, it was a sign that the times had changed. Because Vader wanted no part in the bureaucracy of the new Empire, he took his fleet and left for the Outer Rim. He believed that it was his duty to help clean it up, and make sure right was done for the people of the Empire, and there it was. He wasn't truly evil, not a Jedi, not a Sith, just a man now trying to do the right thing for the galaxy. He would speak with medical professionals that would assist him with getting back into a more human-like form. In the months following the end of the war, the new empire would be established, with Prime Minister Bail Organa heading the new Senate and his daughter Leia Organa leading as Senator of the planet of Alderaan. Bail did consider telling Vader, but he left it alone. That would be something he would do with Jedi supervision. Vader, on the other hand, was entirely responsible for the beginning of the Imperial Golem platforms set up across the Outer Rim. This would help people transfer into the new system while avoiding crime. People who wanted to work were also sent to the Outer Rim, Mid-Rim, and Core to help get bustling economies to rise again. Grand Admiral Thrawn was commemorated for his work, so were Grand Inquisitor and his two students, Seventh Sister and Merrick, Vader, Krennic, Paleon, Veers, and Saw Gerrera. Director Krennic's Anakindan plan would be seen as a stroke of genius, and it would be remembered as one of the great strategies of all time. An implementation of total war without the civilian casualties side of things. This new empire would have a lot of work though, but one thing was pronounced, especially by Vader. Those who served closely with Palpatine did not deserve their power. Their assets were gained off the backs of slaves, and they were the ones who paid for a war to go on for nearly 4 years. It was time that they paid their penance. The Clone War instigators were killed. Let these people be humiliated. Let their assets be used for the betterment of those who were wronged. It was time for the Empire to rise above the autocracy of the former one. Vader for years would continue to operate in the Outer Rim. His role had gone from leader of the resistance movement to fleet trainer. He lost his suit, gained some hair implants, and went to work as a fighter pilot. He was the go-to instructor in the Outer Rim, and his program allowed anyone. No pay was necessary. All that was asked for was donations if they could afford it. Due to the new Empire funding his bank account for his services during the war, he didn't really need credits. All the donations went back into the school he started. It was very large, but he did his best to teach everyone equally. Among the teachers were Han Solo and Wedge Antilles. In one of those classes, Vader would meet a young man from Tatooine, a kid named Luke Skywalker. They would eventually learn the whole truth, and it would be Obi-Wan to inform him. While it wasn't the best way to learn about these things, it was better now than later. Because of Vader's transformation, the Jedi wouldn't feel inclined to strike up their rivalry with him, and they would simply coexist, being that with Vader, the Sith would die. However, despite Yoda and Obi-Wan restarting the Jedi Order on Tython, there would be various sects of the Jedi Order. There would be a splinter group started by the Witch and Jedi, Marin and Cal. There would be the more family-oriented group of Kanan, Ezra, Sabine, and eventually Jacen and Dula. They formed alliances, but they never really came together as one Jedi Order, but the Jedi way would survive. With Luke and Leia learning of their father, and he not being a total monster for the last 10 or so years, they would begin to start having a normal family life with each other, as Vader watched his kids grow up and excel at their respective positions. Luke eventually became an admiral in the Imperial Navy, after being the ace pilot to cripple an entire pirate destroyer by himself. And Leia would be the future Prime Minister of the new Empire, being the youngest senator to rally together members of the unknown regions, and begin integrating the galaxy into a larger, more fulfilled and unified place. In her term as Prime Minister, they would begin an age of exploration. The new Empire thrived where the old one died, and with the people unified, there was a chance for anything to happen. Thanks to Thrawn, they never demilitarized, but they did rise above corruption, greed, and acts of terror and negligence for generations to come. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all of our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Darth Vitiate, Seiju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Angel Dust, Alexandra Reese, The Beginning and End, Django Fat Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Gallivant Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sirwelm1767, Darth Revan, Granity Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewoo670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny Naguin, Save the Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Callie, Young Lisa 66, Madman Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, 46 Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, many 3 first names, Darksing46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. I had so much fun writing this. This was so fun. Alright, fun fact, I grew up like 45 minutes away from Gettysburg. If you couldn't tell the first battle was Gettysburg, that was Gettysburg. This is the American Civil War. Welcome to History 101 with Penty Patrol Star Wars. Just kidding. But no, there's obviously some very non-subtle nods to that Civil War, but I really liked kind of taking Vader on this path. This is like, it kind of reminded me of the Luke Skywalker Imperial Academy story. It was just a different kind of time period where you take this post Obi-Wan Kenobi show Vader and kind of give him that patience that you see in A New Hope. I think so much of what he learned from that duel with Obi-Wan in Episode 6 of Kenobi is why he is Vader in A New Hope, and I think that would lead to him kind of, in this scenario, seeing the rise of slavery in a different lens. I do believe that Vader learned about slavery early on, and I don't know if that's in canon or not, so I kind of just pushed it back for the case of this story, so that Vader would feel more inclined to act upon it. I feel like that's something that he could do and act upon, especially after such an interaction with Kenobi a couple months before. I thought using the events of Solo to kind of kickstart the story would be a lot of fun, and having Thrawn, Vader, and Krennic work together feels like the perfect team of Imperial officers to kind of take it to the Empire. So I hope you enjoyed this battle. I hope you enjoyed all the footage I got from the Empire War Remake mod for Forces of Corruption. Otherwise, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.